As always, before we commence, let us all take a moment to reflect on the fact that it is the Lord Buddha's Dhamma that we have the privilege today of discussing, learning, understanding and comprehending. It's thanks to him that today we have a path to liberate ourselves from the shackles of samsara. And so before we commence, let us all pay homage to the peerless one, the uncomparable one, the perfect one, the one who went beyond what we could aim for, what we could imagine, and what he discovered, he gifted to all of us, the great Supreme Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Also, before we commence, let us take a moment to invite all the devas, brahmas, spirits, demons and the dead, anyone who we may have come past and come across in samsara, anyone who might have offered us a glass of water or perhaps just shown us the way when we were lost. Throughout our journey, endless journey in samsara, those who might have been our fathers and mothers, brothers, sisters, teachers, uncles, aunts, nephews and grandparents, let us take a moment to invite all of them such that they may rejoice in this meritorious deed that is just about to unfold, and may they all also be able to listen to this Dhamma, comprehend this Dhamma and be able to realize the supreme bliss of Nibbana. So as I make this invitation, I ask you all to join me in making this invitation in your minds to all the spirits, demons, dead, the devas, the brahmas, and anyone of your ancestors who perhaps are not here with you today. If they are in any way, shape or form able to listen to these sermons, may they join us. We open our hearts and minds, we open up these places and we invite them wholeheartedly to join us, and may they all be able to attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Samanta Chakravalesu Atta Gacchantu Devata Saddhammam Munirajansa Sunantu Sagga Mokkadam Dhammasavana Kalo Ayam Badhanta Dhammasavana Kalo Ayam Badhanta Dhammasavana Kalo Ayam Badhanta. Also, before we commence, let us take a moment to acknowledge the fact that although today we may be in robes and you dressed in white, representing the pureness of your hearts, this transformation that has happened in our lives is because of the Dhamma. But throughout our journey in samsara, we have been unfortunate that the times when we came across the Dhamma are innumerable to those times when we had the association of immoral people and ignoble people. And in having those associations, they defiled our minds with raga, dvesha, moha. And having been blinded with ignorance and attachment, avidyā and tanha, we may have insulted the Aryans, abused and slandered them. So, for all the times that we may have either knowingly or unknowingly hurt, insulted, slandered or abused the Samma Sambuddhas, the Pacchika Buddhas, the Arahata Buddhas, the Anagami, Sakrutāgami, Sotapannas, be they on the path or having attained the fruit, as well as the Samma Sambuddha Shasana, the Buddha's ministry, may those Aryas find the gracefulness in their hearts to forgive us for all the misdeeds that we might have done. And also, finally, before we commence, let us all make a firm resolve such that through the course of this sermon, may we all be able to attain the attainment of Sotapanna through the course of this sermon itself. And with that firm resolve in your minds, let us all get prepared to listen to this sermon. Okay. Those of you who have been coming along since the beginning will know that we've started growing in numbers. I think I fondly remember when I first started delivering these sermons, there was just my trusted apprentice who was only a lay person back then, and his two sisters. So we met up at my place when we were back in the UK, and we had one-to-one chats. That was what it was. And then over time I found myself a laptop and I started speaking to a screen. I didn't know who was listening. It was just a screen I was sat in front of, delivering these sermons. And then again, fast forward time, we found a small venue and then we started there, and today, as you can see, there's quite a few of you, which is great for each and every one of you individually. But what we mustn't forget is that this battle, and I keep calling it and referring it to as a battle because it is a battle, this battle that we are fighting against raga, dvesha, moha, we're all fighting this, we're all lone warriors. We've got to fight this out ourselves. People can help us by giving us the Dhamma. That's all someone else can do. That's all a Kalyana Mitra can do. The Buddha can't, he can't do it for you. All the Buddha can do is give you the path. He can show you the path, but you've got to walk it. And you've got to release yourself. You've got to redeem yourself. You've got to find your own salvation. So whilst it's great that there are quite a few of you now interested and wanting to find the path to redeem yourselves, please don't forget that we are all in here by ourselves. There's just you and nobody else in this fight against samsara. In this fight against raga, dvesha, moha, there's nobody else that can come and save you. It's a lone battle. You're alone, lone warriors. Okay? So don't forget that. Now, last week we discussed paticca, dependent origination. And I'm hoping perhaps at least a few of you might have had the chance to listen to it at least once again, because some of these concepts, they're very profound, they're deep concepts. Paticca is never an easy one to understand, let alone deliver. And I think I told you last week once when Venerable Ananda went and said to the Buddha, I was listening to that sermon you delivered on Paticcasamuppada, and that makes perfect sense to me. I got all of it. That's really quite easy. To which the Buddha replied, Ananda, you have spoken out of place. Never, ever, ever say that again. You are deeply mistaken. Dependent origination, Paticcasamuppada is like the great deep ocean. The further you walk into it, the deeper it gets. And if you're not careful, you can drown in it and destroy yourself. So like I said last week, what we need to do is, if all we want to do is bathe and cleanse ourselves, we don't need to walk into the middle of the ocean to do that. Well, you've got a tap at home. The water comes from the oceans. It comes from the lakes, it comes from the rivers. You don't necessarily have to go there to do that. So, because we have the privilege of doing that, let's do it the easy way and not make it hard on ourselves. In either case, last week, this introduction that we did on Paticcasamuppada, we discussed how Avidyā is responsible for Sankhara, Sankhara is responsible for Vijnana, Vijnana is responsible for Namarupa, so on and so forth. And we made an attempt to understand how it is that we come out with this product, which is jati, bhava-paccaya jati. How does becoming come into place? How are beings born? And like I said, if you remember, Paticcasamuppada is not just there to explain rebirth, but it explains everything that comes into birth, comes into existence. From fish to pets, to cats, dogs, rats, to human beings, to individual thoughts. Each chitta is a result of a Paticcasamuppada process. At least one. But within one chitta there's 16 Paticcasamuppada cycles. But don't you worry, I'm not going to talk about Paticcasamuppada today again. However, what I want to do is follow up on just one thing that we discussed last week, because I thought that would be useful. You see, the Buddha came into this world to treat a specific problem. Like scientists come along and treat all kinds of problems, practical problems. I mean, thank scientists we have the light bulb. For scientists we have fans and tiles and buildings. It's thanks to them we have these things. The Buddha comes into this world, and he was the greatest scientist there was, because he solved the greatest problem that we all have. This one problem that we are all subject to. No matter how many light bulbs we can invent, no matter how many fans or cars, or how many times we're able to travel to the moon, we're all subject to disease, to decay and death. And then we're all caught in this rebirth cycle that just keeps going on and on and on until we try and find a cure for this. So that is what the Buddha comes into this world to cure. Something that no one else is able to find a cure for. So when he put forward Paticcasamuppada, what he tries to show us is, what is the problem initially? I think I've mentioned to you this in the past, and I'm sure there'll be lots of you who will have listened to sermons way before I even came into this world. Way before I was born, there'll be lots of you who will have listened to sermons. So, and I'm sure if you think back to those sermons, whether it was delivered by a monk or a layperson, they would have told you to let go. Wouldn't they? They would have spoken to you about Nibbana and let go. In letting go, you will find happiness. Isn't that what all sermons said? So from a very young age, even when you went to Dhampasal, when you went to the temple, from a young age, that's what they taught you. Let go and then you'll be happy. But that was when you were at a very young age. Fast forward 20, 30, 40 years today, what have you actually found yourself doing? Letting go or gathering more? I mean, look back at your lives. The monk at the temple said, let go. What did you do? You gathered. So, was he just wasting his time? Were you just wasting your time then? Everything he said don't do, you went and did. Every time he said let go, you went and got hold of. You gathered, you collected, you built, you aggregated. And then you ask this question, why am I still suffering? Well, you've been doing everything that he said don't do. But it's not so easy, and I understand that. Just like you, I was a layperson once. So just like you, in order to find happiness in my life, what I did was gather, build, accumulate. So this letting go business was never easy. Let's be fair, right? Is it easy to let go? Well, if it were, you'd all have let go by now. Shall I bring some Atapirikara and then let's all go and be ordained in the monastery? You all prepared to do that now? No. So it's not so easy to let go then. Letting go is one of the hardest things to do. Letting go is one of the hardest things to do if you don't know why you have to let go. If you don't know how to let go. Well, actually more importantly, if you don't know why you have to let go. When you understand the problem with holding on to something, then letting go is really not that difficult. But first you need to understand what the problem is. Like I said, I've told you in the past, I give you a bit of paper on which I've written a few numbers. Right? I think I've said this a few times now. A few random digits. I don't know, 4, 8, 12. I ask you, is there any particular number that looks particularly interesting? And you just say, oh, they're just some random numbers. No number is particularly more interesting than the other. And then I tell you, okay, here's another bit of paper and on which I've written the sum 6 plus 6 equals. And now I ask you, look at the first paper and bit of paper and tell me, does any number look interesting in particular? You will say, absolutely. The number 12 stands out. Why? Because now you know the problem. Until you know the problem, I could come and slap you in the face with the answer, but it's just going to be another thing that you know. So this is why we spend a lot of time trying to understand what the problem is. This is why a lot of time I talk about suffering. I talk about what the real underlying problem is. Because when the problem becomes obvious, ladies and gentlemen, the answer becomes obvious too. This is why the Buddha says, when someone realizes the first noble truth, the second, the third and the fourth noble truths become obvious. If you understand the second noble truth, then the first and the third and the fourth becomes obvious. If you understand the third noble truth, then the first, the second and the fourth becomes obvious. And if you understand the fourth noble truth, then the first, second and the third becomes obvious. The easiest place to start this is usually the first and the second, because then the problem becomes clear. But to people like Upatissa, who later on went on to become the most venerable Sariputta. To them all they needed was Ye Dhamma Hetu Pabhavate Sang Hetu Tathagato Aha. That's all they needed. That's all they needed to become Sotapannas. But look at you and I, how long have we been listening to sermons now? And we're still gathering, we're still building, finding it really difficult to let go. So the reason I make reference to last week's discussion on Paticcasamuppada is because actually if you look at Paticcasamuppada from left to right or from top to bottom, what it describes is the first and the second noble truths. It gives you Dukkha Arya Satya and Dukkha Samudaya Arya Satya. The Dukkha Arya Satya, or the first noble truth, that's the first noble truth of suffering, that's encompassed within Paticcasamuppada, is where you have Jati Pacca, Jara Marana Shoka Parideva, Dukkha Domanasa, Eva Metasa Kevalasa, Dukkha Khandasa Samudaya Hoti. That's in Pali, which loosely translates to, with birth, due to birth, you have decay, you have disease, you have death, you have old age, you have suffering, you have torment, you have physical and mental ailments and all those things that come as a result. But the root for that is Jati. And then the second noble truth is also contained within that left to right or top to bottom, whichever way you look at it. So you could write Avidyā Paccaya Sankhara, Sankhara Paccaya Viññāna, top to bottom, or you could write it left to right. And now it's talking about, well, what is the cause for that suffering? Because it says Avidyā Paccaya Sankhara, Sankhara Paccaya Viññāna. In fact, if you then want to understand, well, okay, now I understand the problem, I understand the cause for the problem, how do I eradicate this problem? What's the solution? All you need to do is just go backwards. What causes jati? Bhava causes jati. In fact, what causes suffering? It's jati that's responsible for suffering. What causes jati? Bhava causes jati. What causes bhava? Upadana causes bhava. So on and so forth until you go all the way back to avidya. And then finally the question is, well, what is the process? What is it that I physically have to do to redeem myself of that process so I no longer have to suffer? That's what I'd like to talk to you about today. So I think today will probably be quite practical in a lot of senses. Because, I always say, you come here, you get theory, but your labs are your lives. That's where you have to go and put what you learn into practice. Because until you put what you learn into practice, this is just another lesson. It's just another seminar. It's just another 3 hours that you spent in your life. And having gained what? That only you have the answer to that. So if you trace back from dukkha, back to jati, back to bhava, back to upadana, back to tanha, all the way back, you come to avidya. Now, I think you'll remember last week I asked you the question, what is it the Buddha said? And I asked you to fill in the blanks, and I said, blank jayati soko, blank jayati bhayam. And you volunteered the answer, tanha jayati soko, tanha jayati bhayam. So it's tanha or attachment which is responsible for soka, shoka which is suffering, and bhaya which is fear. Okay? So you volunteered those answers, that's great. So one might think, well, so what I need to do then is eradicate attachment. Is that so easy to do? Like I said, from a very young age you've been listening to sermons all the way up until now, and we've always said, let go of attachment, stop being so attached to things, just let go of things. Do you not find yourself saying that to your parents as they get older? Mother, it's time you stop getting so attached to whatever you're holding on to, whether it's property or your kids or your vehicles or whatever the case might be. Just let go. Whether it's dad, just let go. Right? It's that age in your life where you've got to settle down. I mean, you're 85 for heaven's sake. Right? So just let go. Let the world worry about its own problems. Don't you go and start worrying about these problems, because you've got very limited time. So you've got to relax yourself. Well, that's not going to be so easy to do at 85. Because 85 years, all you've been doing is attaching yourself to things. How can you change your lifestyle? How can you change the way you are overnight? That's not so easy. So if someone says, what I want to do is eradicate attachment, and they say, actually, you know what, I don't want to worry about ignorance. Ignorance is not my problem. Avidyā is not my problem. I want to work at attachment. Let's get to work at attachment. Or another one might come and say, you know what, I'm not so interested in avidyā. I'm not interested in ignorance. What I want to do is eradicate at upadana. That's where I want to start treating this problem. We can happily say, okay, fine, off you go. If someone says, I want to work at upadana, what is it that causes upadana? Tanha causes upadana, attachment. So, to eradicate upadana, you have to start at tanha. Tanha nirodho, upadana nirodho. There's no other way you can remove upadana until and unless you remove attachment. And therefore someone might say, well, let me not worry about upadana, I'll just remove attachment, tanha. Well, what is it that causes tanha? Vedana paccaya tanha. So whether you like it or not, you've got to work on Vedana, because that's the only way. For as long as you have Sukha Vedana, you're going to be attached to things. Now, where do you think I'm going with this? So then another guy comes along and says, okay, well, if it's Vedana, I'll work on Vedana. Well, to eradicate Vedana, where do you need to go? Passa. You see, it doesn't matter where you want to start on this cycle. Wherever you start, you have to walk all the way back to the root of the problem, which is avidyā. Which is great news, by the way, for all of us. Because had we had to work on each of these bonds and this chain, well, we'll never be able to get it done in this birth, certainly. That will be a long night. Lifelong battle it will be. But fortunately, all we have to do is work on Avidyā, because Avidyā is the foundation. On that foundation is built this structure. This 12-story building is built on top of Avidyā. So if you destroy the foundation, then the entire building collapses. Isn't that great? All we have to do is work on Avidyā. So simple. Because if we had to work on Vijnana, if we had to work on Salayatana, if we had to work on Passa, if we had to work on Vedana, if we had to work on Tanha, then we've got a lot of work to do. But frankly, and quite simply, all we have to do is work on Avidyā. If we fix the problem there, at the root, that's it. Problem solved. Isn't that easy? Isn't that great news for all of us? So let's get to work on Avidyā. Is that a fair proposal? Yes or no? Okay, so let's get to work on Avidyā. What is Avidyā? Okay, no, don't say ignorance. That's just a translation. Okay, I'll ask the question then, what is ignorance? Now don't give me it's Avidyā. We'll be here all day. The Buddha gives a very clear description of what Avidyā is. He says, Dukkhe Ajnana, Dukkha Samudaya Ajnana, Dukkha Nirodha Ajnana, Dukkha Nirodha Gamini Patipadaya Ajnana. It's ignorance of Dukkha, Arya Satya. It's ignorance of the cause for suffering. So Dukkha is being suffering. It's ignorance of suffering. It's the ignorance of the cause for suffering. It's the ignorance of the eradication of suffering, and it's the ignorance of the root to eradicate, or the path to eradicate suffering. Now, let me ask you this question. So the Buddha says, Avidyā is ignorance of suffering. Are you really that ignorant? Are you ignorant of suffering? If someone comes and hits you, does that not hurt you? So are you ignorant of suffering? When you have a stomach ache, doesn't that hurt you? Do you not feel it? So are you ignorant of suffering then? If your mother passes away, your father passes away, does that not bring a tear to your eye? Does that not cause you a great deal of suffering? So how does the Buddha say ignorance of suffering, or ignorance of suffering is Avidyā? Well, aren't we all so familiar with suffering? Isn't that like our best friend by now? All our lives we've come across so much suffering, all kinds of suffering. You know, when you lost your first tooth, when you had your first stomach ache, when someone first came and hit you, when someone first came and shouted at you, when you lost your job, when you got in an accident, when your parent passed away, when you fell and broke your whatever, each time it caused you suffering. So how is it then that the Buddha says ignorance of suffering is Avidyā? We should stop and ask the question. Okay, good. So if suffering is so obvious and it's something that we are so familiar with in our lives, then we don't really need a Buddha to come and teach us that. Because we've all experienced suffering, we've all experienced plenty of suffering in our lives. I mean, speak to someone who's a Muslim, or a Christian, a Hindu, a Jain, and they'll all say, well, you know, I can give you a list of times when I suffered, and each time it caused me a great deal of suffering, so I really don't need your Buddha to come and tell me that suffering is a problem, because I know suffering is a problem. So if the Buddha had to go through all that entire process of fulfilling the perfections, the paramitas, to then come and teach us about suffering, he's clearly talking about a different kind of suffering. It's not the suffering that's obvious on the surface to us. So what is that suffering that is the question we need to ask. Remember, he talks about dukkha arya satya, not dukkha. Dukkha arya satya. The noble truth of suffering, not just suffering. And there's a difference then. It's the ignorance of the noble truth of suffering that's the problem here. It's the ignorance of the noble truth for the cause of suffering that's the problem here. You see, someone's mother passes away. You ask him, what is it that caused you this suffering? It's my mother passing away, will be the obvious answer. Again, you don't need the Buddha to teach you that. Do you? No, why do you need the Buddha to teach you that when your mother dies it causes you suffering? Haven't we known that all our lives? Yes. Doesn't someone who's a Muslim know that? Doesn't a Catholic person know that? Doesn't a Hindu know that? The problem is, we are talking about a different kind of suffering to the suffering that the Buddha is talking about. He talks about a suffering that is not so obvious on the surface. He's talking about the suffering that's underneath. Underneath the things that to us looks obvious, like it's bringing us pleasure. The things that look like it brings us a great deal of pleasure, he says, that's where your suffering is. He says, look at the suffering that's behind pleasure. Sapa pijipasitina dukkha. Look at the suffering that lies behind the veil of pleasure. And then you'll see the noble truth of suffering. Remember when we played that game and we all came up with a score of 7-0? Do you remember? 6-1? 6-1, yes, sorry. 6-1. And I asked you plenty of times the question, you know, every time there was a tear that came into your eye, was that because you lost something that you really, really liked or you really, really didn't like? Every time you suffered, it was because you lost something that you liked, you were attached to. But if you ask a normal person, someone who is not an Arya, someone who has no understanding of the Buddha's teaching, what is it that causes you suffering? And say, well, the loss of my parents, being hit, losing my job, losing my property, going bankrupt, that's what causes me suffering. Whereas the Buddha says, no, you don't need to worry about those things. Those things bring you suffering. Yes, we've always known that. But what about the things that on the surface looks like it brings you a lot of happiness, a lot of pleasure? Your mother, your children, your car, your house, your wife. On the surface, it looks like they bring us a great deal of happiness. But every time we cried, was it not because of those very things? Every time we got angry, was it not because of those very things? Every time there was a fire that was lit in our hearts and in our minds, was it not because of those very things? Because whatever it is that brings us happiness on the surface, underneath we don't see at that point in time the suffering that is destined to come our way. Can you name me one thing that you're attached to that would one day not go to decay and death? Is there any such thing? No. Everything that we are attached to one day leads us to death, disease. One day leads to disease and decay and death. If I were to give you a mango that was injected with poison, what do you think you should be scared of?
Mango.
Why is that? Because? Because? Think before you jump to an answer. Is it the mango or the poison that we should be scared of? It's the mango. Because it's not the poison that we go and attach ourselves to. No one goes and finds a bottle of poison and starts gulping it down unless he was crazy and wanted to commit suicide. But we're not like that. We're intelligent people. So we're trying to find happiness in our lives, not trying to end our lives. Right? That would be far too easy. No, we want to find happiness. And in wanting to find happiness, we go and eat mangoes. We like to find things that give us pleasure. We go after them. But we don't see the suffering that's bound to come our way as a result of that. See, we live in the short term. We don't look at the long term. You know how many times people say, don't worry about short-term plans. Look at the long-term plan. Where is this going to get you later on? Oftentimes people advise you of this. And this is what we need to be mindful of. This is what we need to be able to open our eyes, not our eyes that are, of flesh and bones, our wisdom eye. We need to be able to open our wisdom eye to see, where does suffering come from? It never came from the things that I didn't like. It always came from the things that I liked. The things that I thought brought me pleasure were ultimately the things that brought me unhappiness. That's where avidya is. That's the ignorance that people suffer from. That beings, all sentient beings suffer from. Not knowing that. Not being able to see that. You see, before the Buddha came along, people wanted to go to the heavens and thought that's where I could be happy. What they didn't realize was, by going into the heavens, why do you go into the heavens? Because you are attached to the sensual pleasures that you can get in the heavens. What happens after that? What happens when you attach yourself to sensual pleasures and in the course of your lifetime there, you lose it? If you take the Pirit Potha and read it, there will be, I don't know if any of you have had a chance to read the Pirit Potha, you will see Chanda Pirita, Surya Pirita. And if you have the time to refer to those Pirit texts, you will see these are occasions when the Devas come to the Buddha and they complain to him. They say, "Oh Buddha, please save me from Rahu, who is an Asura." And some of you may have heard of the battles that they have in the heavens between the gods and the Asuras. Deva and Asura. They have battles up there. And you thought life there was great. There's a god called Chanda who comes to the Buddha and says, "Please save me. This Asura is going to come and destroy me." There's a god called the Surya who comes to the Buddha and he pleads to him, "Please save me from this Asura." But not being able to see that there is decay, disease and death, even in the heavens, what do people do? They attach themselves to the heavenly realm. And now they do sankhara to go to the heavens. Think about parents when you had children. Either looking at your friends or looking at pictures on magazines or maybe the internet, and you thought, wow, I want to have a kid of my own. You go on Facebook, people post pictures of how they spend a lovely time with their kids, and you think, that's what I want in my life. That would just make my life complete. From the day you had your kids, was there ever a day from the time you had your kids that you never had a tear in your eye because of them? That you were never angry from the day they were born? Any parent here? Just one at least? I mean, come on, you have the perfect kids, right? No. But you didn't see that side of things. You see, even if I asked you today, why do you cry when your child misbehaves? The answer to that is going to be, because my child misbehaves. You see, we fail to see the real reason. Why is it that I cry? You're always pointing the finger outside. That's where the problem is. Remember the two types of people in this world? I've said this in the past. There's one guy who goes out and, they're both pointing their finger saying, you are the problem, fix yourself. One's pointing out the window, the other's pointing through a mirror. The guy that's pointing out the window is always pointing at other people, other things. Go fix yourself, you're the problem. Hey son, I don't like what you're doing, go sort yourself out. Daughter, I don't like what you're doing, go sort yourself out. You're my colleagues, you should behave, you should know better than this. Go and sort yourself out. Why didn't you complete the report on time? You go to the shopkeeper and you start shouting at him, these goods that I bought, it's a load of rubbish. Made me really angry. Now you're trying to sort the world. Whereas the other guy, he points the finger at the mirror. And now he's trying to fix himself, not the world outside. Again, you see, parents, you say, it's my child that brought me suffering. That's where we are mistaken. Because if today you think it's a child that's making you unhappy, I'll take the child away. I'll adopt him. Are you happy from now? No, then you have the other child. Okay, I'll take both your kids away. Now, or you still have your job, you still have your husband, you still have your wife, you have your mother, you have your father. What, you want me to take all of them away? Can you ever rid yourself of the things that make you unhappy? No, that's never achievable. Okay, so someone says, right, I'll go and live on Mars then. It's the people on planet Earth that make me unhappy. You go to planet Mars. What, you think you're not going to find things that are going to annoy you there? No matter where you go, there's always going to be things that upset you. Things that make you unhappy, things that make you angry. But the fault is not with them. The fault is with you. That not knowing that is avidya. Not realizing that is ignorance. You see, because until you get to that understanding, you're always going to want to change the world. Isn't that what we all try to do with our lives? And we still continue to do, try and change the world. Employers, they try to change their employees. Employees try to change the employer. You don't pay me enough. Well, you don't work hard enough. Husbands trying to change their wives. I don't like the way you talk to me. Well, I don't like the time you come back home from work. And wives trying to change their husbands. Parents trying to change their children. You don't work hard at school. Go do your homework. Well, you promised me that bike. You didn't get me that. I'm not going to work hard if you're not going to give me the things you promised. Everyone's trying to change somebody else. Because everyone thinks the problem is outside. This is why we have strikes. Why do people go on strike? Now you're demanding someone else to change. How many strikes before there are no more strikes? There's never going to be a day like that. Why? Because everyone's trying to change somebody else, not trying to fix themselves. Not knowing that the problem is within you is avidya. That's where ignorance is. You see, it's always the things that on the surface looks like brings me happiness, that underneath brings me unhappiness, brings me tears, brings me agony, brings me torment. Again, I repeat, there was never a tear in your eye because you lost something that you didn't like. There was never a tear in your eye because someone took away something that you really didn't like. It was always because someone took away something that you liked and something that you loved. Whether it's naturally or whether because someone came and stole it from you. So what is the cause for that then? It's the attachment to that object. It's the lovely things in life that you want to go and attach to. So going back to that mango. A bottle of poison, no one goes and walks up to it and starts gulping it down. But when you see the mango, now you want to excite your senses. Now you go, you're looking at the mango, you think, wow, that's a lovely mango there. Smells nice. I'm sure it's going to taste nice. And so you go and start eating the mango. But you don't realize that it's been poisoned. It's like the fish that's going to bite the bait on the hook. So does the fish need to worry about, so should the fish be scared of the bait or the hook? The bait. Well done. It's not the hook that the fish needs to be scared of. Because when was the last time a fish went and bit a hook that didn't have a bait attached to it? That doesn't happen. When was the last time you saw a rat caught in a cage when you actually forgot to hang a bit of bait in there? some dried fish or some cheese or whatever the case may be. No, it doesn't happen. You've got to lure it in. You lure it in with something that it likes. And that is the cause of the problem. It's the things that look beautiful. It's the things that look like they're going to bring us pleasure on the surface. That's what brings us unhappiness. That's what brings us suffering. So not being able to see that, not being able to penetrate through that. You see, this is why Vidarshana is called Vidarshana. It's not just, we use the word today Vipassana in English, right? Or insightful meditation. Insightfulness, whatever. Vidarshana is Vidalabalana. To penetrate. What are you penetrating? You're penetrating what looks true on the surface. So you can see underneath. You can see within. Like the example we used last week. When you went to buy a car, you never looked at what you could see right on the surface. You opened the bonnet. You looked under the seats. You looked under the carpets to make sure that the seller hadn't just polished the car. He's just done a quick vacuum job to sell the car to you. You wanted to make sure that this car is genuine. That you're paying what you think you're paying for. To do that, you checked everything. You checked underneath. Likewise, you've got to penetrate what looks true on the surface. When you're able to penetrate what looks true on the surface, you then get to see what's real. If you're not able to do that, then that's avidya. So that's dukkhe ajnanam. Where does suffering come from? Not being able to see that is ignorance. Then dukkha samudaya ajnanam. What is the cause for suffering? Again, you go back to the man who just lost his mother and you ask him, what is it that caused you suffering? And he's going to say, it's the death of my mother. Someone stole my car. That's what people generally think brings suffering. But what did the Buddha say? Attachment brings you suffering. People die in this world every day, but we don't cry. Mothers die every day, don't they? Every woman that dies, 90% of women that die are someone's mother, right? So why are we not crying now? Why are we not crying today? We should all be in tears all the time. Every person that dies is someone's child. So why are we not crying today? It's because it's not my child that died. It's because it's not my mother that passed away. It's because it's not my father that died. So what brought me suffering was as soon as you attach the word my, mine, that attachment is what caused you the suffering. Not mothers dying, not children dying, not anybody dying. That's not what causes you suffering. I don't know if I remember, I can't recall last week, I don't think I shared this story with you. About 2 weeks ago, I was invited to this home where there was a mother and she'd come along with her son. I think he was about 27, 28 years of age. And he had lost his girlfriend. So they were about to become a couple. And they were performing artists. So they do stage drama. Did I share this story? No. Okay. So so he was telling me his story, how he's deeply shocked when we met, and I asked him why, tell me what happened, and he said we were practicing, we were rehearsing for this stage drama, and she was on the stage, I was on the floor, and according to what they had to do for this rehearsal was someone was giving, so the master who was doing the training, he would give a signal. And as soon as a signal was given, the ladies had to jump off the stage and the men on the floor would have to catch them to avoid them falling. Okay? So all the ladies are now lined up on the stage, all the gents are on the floor. But before the instructor could give the signal, this lady jumped. The man wasn't expecting her to jump, and because it happened without him knowing, she fell and she broke her neck. That was the end of that chapter. So clearly, he was in distress. And the parents had tried to, take him to various monks and other counseling sessions, trying to cure him, trying to make him, feel better, and trying to put him out of distress. But no matter what they tried, it really didn't work. So they invited me to come and speak to him, and I sat down and I listened to his story. And then, after I had listened to his story, I said, so you're telling me you're crying because she died, right? So you're mourning her death because you feel sorry for her. Is that true? Is that correct? He says, yes. I feel sorry for her. She should be here with me. She's gone now. What a beautiful life she lived. I feel sorry for her. And I said, are you sure you feel sorry for her, or do you feel sorry for yourself? He says, what do you mean by that? I said, when you got together with her, you did things. You went places. You did things together. You had chats. Right? You shared memories. You did all those things. Ultimately, if you distill it down, you got Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Or if you take it one level up, Rupa, Shabda, Gandha, Rasa, Sparsha. By associating with this woman, this is what you got. Was there anything else that a man gets from a woman other than Rupa, Gandha, Rasa, Sparsha? Rupa, Shabda, Gandha, Rasa, Sparsha? No, nothing else. And the same applies the other way as well. No matter what it is, whether it's mother, son, father, daughter, employer, employee, ultimately all you're getting is Rupa, Shabda, Gandha, Rasa, Sparsha. That's it. Nothing else. Okay? So I asked him, are you really mourning that her losing her, or her loss, or are you mourning your loss? Because you can no longer do the things that you did with her. You can no longer share the stories that you did with her. You can no longer go and see sights that you did with her. You can no longer go to parties or go to a restaurant and enjoy those experiences like you did with her. And apparently, so the guy was a Buddhist, but I think the lady was a Catholic. And was it the other way around? I think it's the other way around. And so I asked him, according to your philosophy, your teaching, if a person lives a good life, what happens to them? Well, they go to heaven. And I said, well, shouldn't you be happy then? I mean, now she no longer has to suffer in this human world. She's in heaven. Wouldn't you like to go to heaven when you die? Yeah, I'd love to. Well, she's there. She's where you want to be right now. So surely you should be happy for her. So I ask you the question again. Who are you mourning now? Are you mourning for her, or are you mourning for yourself? I saw him staring at me, and at the end of that sermon he said, it feels like you slapped me in the face. But what you said was the truth. Now I understand that actually I was mourning my loss, not hers. We're all selfish people. Unfortunately, that's the truth, whether you like to listen to it or not, whether you like to hear it or not. We're all very selfish people. Relationships, all these relationships we build is because we want something from the other person. Whether it's husband, wife, parents, children, employer, employee, all these relationships are for self-preservation, for my preservation, to keep me going. For me to keep going, I need things from you. You're a supplier. Feels like a business, right? You're a supplier. For me to be able to produce the things that I need for my self-preservation, I need you to supply things. And when you stop supplying things, then what do? Either I go find a new supplier, right? Isn't that what people do? A guy goes out with a girl for as long as he gets what he wants from her. When she says no, that's it. Or she doesn't speak to him nicely. I think we've talked about this in the past. She doesn't speak to him nicely. He doesn't come home at the times that has been promised to her. Then the relationship starts breaking up. Why? Because either party is not getting what they expected from the other party. So when that happens to be the case, then you start changing suppliers. What you do then is really you try to change the world according to what you want. To preserve yourself, you want to change the world. Now let's go one level deeper, because we're talking very superficial here. Let's put this into what the Buddha taught us about Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. What is Rupa? You know, you've heard the terms Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, right? We call it the Panchaskandha. What you're looking at. That's one of 6 Rupa. There are 5 other types of Rupa. There's Rupa, which is what you're looking at. There's Shabda Rupa, which is what you're listening to. There's Gandha Rupa, the stuff you smell. There's Rasa Rupa, the taste. There's Pottabha Rupa, what your physical sensations. And there's Dhamma Rupa, the things that only your mind can perceive. Like memories, concepts, like negative numbers. That's a concept, that's a Dhamma Rupa. You can't show it, you can't hear it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. It's a Dhamma Rupa. So all these Rupas are Rupas. 6 kinds of Rupa. Then there's Vedana. Vedana is sensation. So you have Sukha Vedana, which is good sensation, pleasurable sensation. There's Dukkha Vedana, which is unpleasurable sensation. And then there's Adukkama Sukha Vedana, or Upeksha Vedana, which is equanimous sensation. And again, if you remember last week, we talked about equanimous sensation, and I said, ultimately it's all a load of suffering underneath. Right? So if you weren't here last week, go back and listen to previous week's sermon. Then you have Rupa Vedana Sanya. This is how you identify things. Like your identification card, your national ID card. Right? You take your national ID card, on it is given your name, your date of birth, right? Your address, whether you're male or female. So all those details, this is what someone uses to identify you. Likewise, any object that we come across, any Rupa, Shabda Rupa, Gandha Rupa, Rasa Rupa, or Pottappa Rupa, or Dhamma Rupa that we come across, what we want to do, what we do is give it a sanya. We give it something to, we issue an identity card. That's quite literally what it is. We issue an identity card. So that next time someone comes up to you and says, hey, do you know Sunil? Now you have an identity card for Sunil. You know what he looks like, you know what he smells like, you know what he feels like. If someone says chocolate, milk chocolate, there's a separate identity card for milk chocolate to the identity card you offer to dark chocolate. Then there's strawberry flavored chocolate. Each of these types of chocolate have a different identity card. Because each one of those has a different Rasa Rupa. Each one of those has a different Rupa. Each one of those might have a different Shabda Rupa, depending on if when you bite it, does it have a different type of crunch to it? Then it might have a different Shabda Rupa. Each one of it will have a different Gandha Rupa, how it smells. For you to be able to pull all those things from your memory in one go, you give it an identity card. It's like issuing an identity number. Because when it's like when you have a database. You give the primary key, you type in the primary key, you get all the information that sits behind it. The primary key being what you use to organize your database, right? It's like your national ID number. Or if you're at school, your student number. You type your employee number, you type that number, you get everything that the database holds about this person. Likewise, in our minds, we have a key that we have issued to all these things, all these dhammas that we take in. So that's the sanya. Then there's sankara. Sankara is the process of understanding the world that we live in. So when, for example, you're looking at an object through your eyes, light hits the object, enters your eyes, goes through your retina, onto your retina, and then your ocular nerves, I think they're called. Your visual nerves, they take an impulse to your brain, and then you see the object. Now, at one point, your brain is going to leave an imprint on your mind. At the moment an imprint is left on the mind, that is the Rupa Rupa. It's not the object, but it's the imprint that it leaves on your mind. Because, say you're looking at a building. The building cannot be put into your mind, can it? You can't lift a building and shove it into your eye. You can't do that. What goes into your mind is an imprint that is left by your brain on your mind. That is the Rupa Rupa. So again, going back to chocolate. When you eat a chocolate, or when there's a bit of chocolate in your hand, it has a Rasa Rupa, it has a Gandha Rupa, it has a Rupa Rupa. Each time, each of your senses taking inputs from that object through your brain, leaving an imprint on your mind. So as you take, okay, I'll take pizza because it's going to be more interesting for some. Right? You take a slice of pizza, you bring it to your mouth. Now it has form, it has color, it has the way it looks. That's Rupa Rupa, the way it looks. Okay? Then it has a smell, it has a taste, it has a texture that you can feel when you put it into your mouth. Each of those things are separate and individual signals that go into your brain. So you see, the moment I say pizza, you know what it looks like, you know what it tastes like, you know what it smells like. Because you're able to go back into your memory banks and pull all that information back in just a flash of a second, are you not? You're able to do that. This is why when I say pizza, it brings a smile to your face. Because in a flash of a second, all that data that you have about a pizza comes running back into your mind, comes running back from the past to the present. The way you're able to do that, and this is how your mind is such a powerful organ. The way that your mind is, or a faculty even, the way your mind is able to do that is it has given a sanya, it's given an ID to all those things that you experienced, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, and the texture. All those things that you took in through the five senses, attached them, bound them together and gave it an ID, pizza. So now when you say pizza, all that stuff comes running back. So to do that process, that's the process of sankhara. It's the doing of that process, wrapping it all up, giving it a signal, giving it a name, going back into your memory banks, pulling stuff back. All that is done by sankhara. Then there's vijnana. So vijnana, finally, which is consciousness, is being aware of all that happening in the background. Now, we're talking about, in the time it takes me to do that, that's like 1 billion chittas. And each of those chittas will have rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, vijnana. So we are never going to be able to distinguish one chitta from the next. Sometimes, I think I've said this in the past, people try to cleanse their chuti chitta. You'll have heard sometimes people say that. Chuti sita pirisudu karagan. So when you cleanse your last chitta in this birth, then you will have attained Nibbana. That's what some people think. Well, how can you catch one individual chitta? If so, if there were, let's say 100 chittas in the time it took me to do that, can you pick the 76th chitta that came into your mind? How about the 52nd? No, because you can't catch individual chittas. That is something only a Samma Sambuddha can do. Only a Samma Sambuddha can perceive individual chittas, break it down into 17 thought moments, and then break each thought moment down into 16 Paticcasamuppada processes. Can you imagine the wisdom that great person had? We can't even perceive one chitta, and he's breaking that down into 17 and each thought moment into 16. And he talks about them. He gives lectures on them. Hour long, 2 hours, 3 hours long lectures on them. Good no, my goodness. The wisdom that he possessed. Fortunately, we don't need all that wisdom to attain Nibbana. Otherwise, we'd be here for a long time. Whereas I think there are some sects of Buddhism who believe to attain Nibbana, you have to become a Samma Sambuddha. And I think that's the Mahayana trend. That's the teaching in Mahayana. I'm not here to criticize one or the other. I'm just saying, I think Mahayana teaching is where, that's why they call it Mahayana. And they call Theravada Hinayana. Maha because great. Yana is the ship or the vehicle. So Mahayana, great vehicle. To cross the ocean of samsara, you need to get into the great vehicle. What is the great vehicle? Becoming a Samma Sambuddha. So this is why they call the Theravada tradition the Hinayana, because Hina is small. Small vehicle. You become an Arahant and you cross the ocean of samsara. So that's good enough for us, but certainly good enough for me. I don't want to become a Samma Sambuddha. I really don't. Right? Anyway, let's come back to Vijnana. So, each thought has Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana within it. Now, thoughts arise, thoughts pass away. Thoughts arise, thoughts pass away. This process is what keeps a being going. I've asked this question from you in the past. If you look right now, reflect on yourself. Who are you? What is you? Just think about the person that sat down on a chair right now, or if you're on the floor. When you think about you, what are you talking about? You have a mind and you have a body. Is there anything more to it? There's a mind and there's a body. That's all, right? There's a mind and a body. The body is not where we have this problem. It's the mind that we have to tackle with. The mind is nothing but Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Arises, passes away. Udavena, Vayana. Udavena, Vayana. Arises, passes away. Arises, passes away. So each thought is Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Each thought. What about the next thought? That's still Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Rises, passes away. Rises, passes away. Because a thought is Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, to build another thought, you need Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Because these are the basic constructs of a thought. The basic building blocks of a thought are Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So if you didn't have Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, would you have thoughts? No, because they're the basic building blocks. It's like if you didn't have carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, you wouldn't have glucose. Because C6H12O6 is what makes up glucose. So take away carbon, take away hydrogen, take away oxygen, completely remove them from the periodic table, you no longer have a molecule called glucose. Likewise, the building blocks of Chittas are Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Take away the building blocks, you have no Chittas after that. This is why when someone enters Parinibbana, you no longer have thoughts. Because all Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana has been eradicated. No more Rupas arise. No more Vedana arises. No more Sanya arises. No more Sankara arises. No more Vijnana arises. When you don't have the basic building blocks, you no longer have Chittas. But for as long as we are alive and for as long as we are attached to continuing this thought process, remember the reason we are going round in samsara is because we want our mind to continue. We want our mind to keep going. Now I'm bringing back stuff we've talked in previous sermons. I'm pulling snippets from here, there and everywhere. So this is why I said in the last week, please, before you come now into future sermons, listen to at least a few of the previous sermons, because otherwise you're going to be completely lost. Otherwise I'm going to have to start from scratch every week. We're having, people are coming new, I'm seeing new faces, which is great, but I encourage you to go back and listen to some of the previous sermons, otherwise you're going to be lost. So remember we talked about climbing Sigiri, right? Some of you were here when we discussed that. Your body didn't ask you to go up Sigiri. Your legs didn't ask you, hey, shall we go up Sigiri and see what sights we can get from there? Your body didn't ask you to travel to Singapore or to Malaysia or to India or wherever you went on holiday. Your eyes didn't ask it either. Your tongue didn't ask for it either. Although you went to an Indian restaurant to try out Indian food, it's not your tongue that asked for it. It's your mind that asked for it. Mano pubbangama dhamma. It's always the mind that asks for these things. For the mind to exist, you need the basic building blocks. What are the basic building blocks? Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So for the mind, I'm trying to build up a logic here, and hopefully keep up, as in listens. Otherwise, you're gonna lose the argument that I'm trying to put here. It's the mind that wants to persevere. It's the mind that wants to continue existence. We use the body to please the mind, not the other way around. Every time we use the body to please the mind. You climbed up Sigiriya not because your body wanted it, your mind wanted it. You keep watching television, staring your eyes. Even when your eyes have gone red and it's all watery, you still keep your eyes open, staring at it. It's not because your eyes want to watch television, it's because your mind wants to watch television. So to please the mind, you use your body. So it's the mind that wants to keep going. And for the mind to keep going, it needs the basic building blocks, which are Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So, for as long as we want the mind to exist, for as long as we want the mind to keep going, we need to be able to take in Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana from the world that we live in. What I'm trying to show to you, what I'm trying to help you to understand is why are we so attached to the world that we live in. Remember how we started this sermon. I said, you've been listening to sermons all your life, but you never let go. All you did was attach yourself to more and more and more. And I'm trying to show you why that is the case. Where this ignorance is, what is causing all this to happen. For your mind to exist then, you need Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. To get Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, you have to associate the world. Why? Because let's say you have, let's go back to the example of the pizza. For as long as you have a slice of pizza in your hand, you can get Rupa, Shabda, Rupa, Gandha, Rupa, Rasa, Rupa, Potta, Rupa from that pizza. What if that pizza wasn't there? Now where do you get your Rupa, Shabda, Rupa, Gandha, Rupa, Rasa, Rupa and Sparsha Rupa? Now where do you get your Vedana from? Now where do you get your Sanya from? Now where do you get your Sankara from? Now where do you get your Vijnana from? Chocolate, same thing goes. If you didn't have the object, the physical object that exists in the outside world, you're no longer able to construct the thoughts that arise within you. So what exists in the outside world supports you to build these thoughts within your mind. Does that make sense? I'm seeing a few blank faces. Tell me if there's anything that's not clear, then please call out so I can help you understand. Otherwise, you see, what I'm trying to do here is to try and translate on the fly. Right? I mean, if I were to deliver this sermon in Sinhala, I could do it far easier. Because, like I said, English wasn't invented to deliver sermons to help people attain Nibbana. English was invented for people to live a good, happy life in a sensual world. So trying to explain Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, trying to explain Nibbana in English is a very difficult thing to do. I'm trying to do that on the fly here. So if there's anything that's not making sense, then please let me know, and I'll use examples, metaphors, similes, whatever it requires to help you understand it. Yes, but for that memory to have come in, you needed that object out there in the first place. You see, so the question that the lady is asking is, if you don't have the physical object out there, will the memory not do that purpose for us? Well, it does. I mean, think about when, if your parent passes away, right? Now that person doesn't exist, but your memory is there. Your memory keeps bringing back the Rupa, Shabda, Gandha, Rasa, Sparsha. If it was your late mother, then it brings back Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana of the late mother. But for you to be able to get that, you need to have seen her in the first place. You need to have smelled her in the first place. You need to have touched her in the first place. And as soon as you do that, that creates memories. Nama Gotta. This is what the Buddha says, Nama Gotta Najirati. Not everything in this world decays and dies, by the way. There is one thing that doesn't decay and die. Memories. Memories don't die. Memories don't decay. Now you might think, well, hang on, I can't remember what I did when I was in grade 5. You can't, but someone else will. And if you were able to jog your memory enough times, then you probably will be able to recall them. Because when we talk about memories, these are thoughts that happen at any given time. Again, go back to your grade 5 class. Your best friend in grade 5, if I asked you what color was his pencil case, you might not be able to recall it right now. That was a long time ago for most of you. But when you saw that pencil case, the thoughts that arose at that point in time released a certain energy into this universe. Science now says E equals mc squared, right? So energy is responsible for creating matter. Science has taken a long time to come across that phenomenon. But the Buddha talked about that 2,500 years ago. It's our thoughts, it's our consciousness that creates this entire universe around us. From the tiniest grain of sand to the stars and planets out there, all of these are the creation of thoughts, consciousness. So when we have thoughts about something, where looking at your grade 5 friend, seeing his pencil case, that the thoughts that you had at that point, nama rupa, it created an energy that was released into this universe. That's like a radio antenna emitting radio waves. If you have a tuner that's able to pick up that radiation, then you can listen to what that radio signal was. Some radios can only pick up certain types of radio waves. You have UHF, you have VHF, you have digital radios these days, right? Different types of machines can read different types of energies. What if you are able to read all types of radio waves? Then you could pick up every type of electromagnetic signal that was ever released into this universe. Today science says energy cannot be destroyed or created. It can only one can be transformed to another, right? So that's true. Energy cannot be destroyed. What happens is that energy exists in the universe, but over time, because the energy that's contained within it reduces but never destroyed, if you have a receiver that's strong enough, you can pick up those signals. The Buddha was someone like that. His receiver was the best receiver you can ever find. His receiver can pick up any kind of energy that exists in this universe. And that's not magic, by the way. If you become a Samma Sambuddha, you can do exactly the same. Excuse me? So, good question. He's asking me, why won't I be one? Because the problem I'm trying to solve is not what energies exist in the outside world. That's not the problem I'm trying to solve. The problem I'm trying to solve is death, disease and decay. Because while I'm struggling, while I'm struggling to be a Samma Sambuddha, I'm still subject to disease, decay and death. And if I don't become a Sotapanna, then the gates of hells are open to me. And when you go into the hells, forget about building receivers to pick up radio signals. Now it's just constant suffering. You see, this is why, some people, I often come across people who say, you know what, I want to become a Samma Sambuddha. I've come across several people like that in my life, but they have no idea whatsoever how much effort it takes to become a Samma Sambuddha. It just flows out their tongue, oh, I just want to become a Samma Sambuddha. It's so easy to say, but it's extremely difficult to do. And remember, someone who becomes a Samma Sambuddha does that, not just for their benefit, but for the benefit of every sentient being in this universe. You need to have that much compassion within you. Because if you are just worried about yourself, if you just wanted to redeem yourself, becoming an Arahat is good enough. Whilst I have compassion towards you, my compassion is finite. It's not infinite. The Bodhisattva's compassion is infinite. So he has no limits or bounds to how much he's prepared to sacrifice himself for the salvation of other people, other beings. Unfortunately, sorry to say, sorry to let you down, I'm not like that. This is why I want to get through this as soon as possible. And becoming Arahat is the simplest, fastest, quickest way to get it done. So, just going back again to Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana. I mean, this is okay, by the way. You know, we can take diversions and, you know, cover other areas which interest you, and that's okay, provided we keep coming back to Nibbana. Because unless we solve the fundamental problem, we'll be talking about the universe for years and years and years. And I don't have the time for that. Who's the first person that's going to die of everyone in this room? Me. That's how I start my day. Today is your last day alive. How are you going to spend today? Because none of us can say, I'm going to be alive tomorrow for certain. So we should all live like today is our last day. If today is your last day, what's the first thing, or what's the most important thing that you want to get done? That's the question you want to ask yourself. Sorry? Attain Nibbana. Very good. So that's why I dedicate my life towards that as well. So, going back. It's our thoughts that keep us going in samsara. And like I explained to you a few moments ago, it's not our bodies that look for sensual pleasure. You know, our bodies get hungry. It's not our mind that wants to feed our hunger. It's the body that needs to be fed when it's hungry. Our bodies fall ill. And it's then not the mind that needs to cure. That is the body that needs curing. Our bodies need something to wear. Our bodies need somewhere to live in. That's all perfectly fine. But when you go beyond that, when you want to watch TV, who's wanting to watch TV? Is your body wanting to watch TV? Your mind's wanting to watch TV.
Why does the mind always want experience?
Because, excellent question. Because the mind is all the mind is interested in is in self-preservation. You see, this is all part to do with ignorance. Ignorance tells us that happiness can only be found by existing. The more you keep going on, the more you can be happy. When something is destroyed, well, just build another one. Because the mind doesn't understand. Like I think I might have said this to you before. The mind is not our enemy, by the way. Yes, we understand that it's because of the mind and the defilements that are in the mind that we are subject to this suffering that we go through, this plight that we are in right now. But that's not because the mind is our enemy. That's only because the mind is fooled. The mind is fooled. It's been tricked. So what we do when we practice the Dhamma is try to show the mind right from wrong. None of us like to be fooled. The mind doesn't like to be fooled either. But because the mind is fooled, the mind comes to the conclusion that to be happy, I need to build, I need to make, I need to accumulate, I need to gather. Just like what we've always been told from the young ages, right? When was the last time a parent said, don't worry about earning a lot of money? No, that's not what parents say. Become a rich man, study hard, work hard, build, make. If you have one house, when are you going to buy the next? Now, I'm not picking on parents, I'm just saying, you know, society, that's what society expects of you. To make more, to build more, to gather more. Because in doing so, that's where society, and this is why people think that we can be happy, in having more. But the more you have, the more you lose. Remember we talked about being security guards for everything that we own? You know, you have one ring on your index finger. But what about, now you're a security guard for that one ring. What if you put one on your middle finger as well? Now you're a security guard for 2 rings. But people think the more rings I have, the happier I can be. The more houses I have, the happier I can be. The more bedrooms I have in my house, the bigger my house, the happier I can be. Whereas they forget that the more bedrooms you have in your home, the more you have to be doing the job of a cleaner. If you're not doing that, you have to pay someone else to do it. Well, money don't grow on trees, so you have to go and work harder to earn the money to pay them to do it. So all that came from from this ignorance that having more is what brings us happiness. And wanting to have more, wanting to do more, wanting to gather more, wanting to accumulate more, the mind does exactly the same thing. The mind wants to live another moment. wants to live another moment because in the next moment it wants to create the world around itself. With each moment, each thought moment, it creates the world. I'm not talking about this world that you see with your eyes. I'm talking about the world that your mind lives in. It creates a new world every time, every time. You know, it's like on your monitors, you know, it has a refresh rate, 60 hertz per second. Sorry, 60 hertz means 60 refreshes a second. So what's happening there is 60 times a second, that picture is getting painted. Your mind's like that. Every time it creates a new picture. Every time a new world is created. With every thought, a new world is created for the mind to live in. So to build that next thought, your mind needs the building blocks that make it up. And these building blocks are the 5 building blocks, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Now to get the Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, it needs to associate the world that it lives in. So it needs to see sights, sounds, smells, tastes. You know, when you're not satisfied with the sights and sounds and smells and tastes that you can get from your hometown, then you go traveling. When you're not satisfied with the sights, sounds and smells and tastes you can get from the country you live in, then you go abroad. You go to other countries and see what other kinds of sights and sounds and smells and tastes you can get. You ring a friend, you speak to him. You ask him, hey, what kind of person are you? You know, think about this. How is it that you make friends with somebody else? You know, when you understand this philosophy, everything in your life you can start untangling. You can start analyzing. Why do you become friends with somebody else? Why does someone become your best friend? It's because the person you choose to be your best friend gives you the kind of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana that you like. He or she gives you the kind of Rupa, Shabda, Gandha, Rasa, Sparsha that you like. He's going to be your best friend for as long as you get the kind of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana that you like. What happens when he stops giving you the kind of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana that you like? Indeed, no longer is he going to be your best friend. See, can you not now explain the entire universe through Dhamma? All things, all conditioned things fall into Paticcasamuppada. This is why the Buddha, you know, he's the greatest teacher of the entire universe. You know, he had the universe on the palm of his hand. Ask him any question, he would give you the answer. He would even go as far as saying, you're asking the wrong question. You know, once someone comes and says, who gives, hang on, he says, someone comes along and asks him, someone comes along and asks him, who gives birth to existence? Wanting to find the answer, because he's looking for the Brahma, Mahabrahma or the Deva, you know, he's asking for a creator. This is the answer he's expecting. The Buddha says, the question you're asking is wrong. The question you should be asking is, what gives rise to existence, not who created existence. Then he says, Bhava gives rise to existence. Becoming gives rise to existence. And then he asks the question, well, who created Bhava? Again, he's looking for a creator. Because these are the kind of mithya drishti, wrong views that existed in the Buddha's time. There were 62 different mithya drishti, 62 different types of wrong view that existed in the time. Each one coming to the Buddha, I mean, can you imagine, you know, in his time, every day he would have had a diary full of engagements and appointments. Everyone trying to come, you know, people of different philosophies, different religious leaders, teachers trying to come and prove that they were right and he was wrong. He must have had a full diary. This is why the Buddha only had 2 hours of sleep. And there's not one single record of the Buddha going into Nirodha Samapatti. Have you heard of Nirodha Samapatti? Nirodha Samapatti is like attaining Nibbana, experiencing Nibbana while you're still alive. Because when you enter it's a state of meditation that you can achieve. When you get to that stage, then all Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana cease. And when the building blocks cease, what happens? Then your thoughts cease. You don't have thoughts from that point forward until the moment you come out of Nirodha Samapatti. So it's like having attained Nibbana in this life itself. I mean, that's what the Buddha would have preferred to do. To be in Nirodha Samapatti for his entire 45 years of existence. But there's not one single record of him having done so. And why was that? Because he wanted to stay awake for the benefit of other people. To help other people realize what he discovered. So for as long as I am interested in self-preservation, for as long as I need to be alive, again, I'll have to ask you to go back and listen to Baby Natasha. If you haven't had the time, please go and listen to that sermon. It's titled Baby Natasha. There we talk about where this me comes from. This self-view. This view that there's a person, that there's a me that exists. There's an I that exists. This entity called I, where does that come from? We've talked about that. So go and listen to it. So for as long as this baby is alive, you need to feed the baby. Right? The mother has to feed baby Natasha to keep her alive. Likewise, for as long as I exist, and I am not this body, I am the mind. I exist within the mind. Therefore, to preserve this I, to preserve me, I have to keep feeding it. What? The building blocks. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. To get the Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, I have to have the world that I live in. There has to be sights, there have to be cats and dogs and people and sheep and cows and chocolate and pizza and ice cream. All these things have to be there. And this is why people invent new things every day, so that they can get more Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. You know, think back to when you were young children. You know, if you are over the age of 50, when you were a young child, did you have half the things that we have now in today's world? No. I don't think there were iPhones back then. I think the internet was barely just coming into this world. Right? Lots of material things that we use today were just, you know, they didn't exist back then. You didn't have 50 different types of papadam back then. But now you do. You didn't have 20 different ways of cooking chicken back then. But now you do. Why? Why isn't man happy with just one way of eating chicken? Why isn't man happy with just one type of papadam? Why is he going after different types, always experimenting, trying to come up with something new? And the answer to that is because he's not satisfied with the Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana that he gets at this moment in time. He wants something new every time. It's craving, yes. So that's where I'm coming to. Now I'm linking this with ignorance. To preserve myself, I need Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. And therefore, to get this Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, I have to be attached to it. When I'm attached to it, I go and bring it, I go and build it, I go and gather and accumulate that. And in doing so, I'm building myself, I'm building this thing called me. I'm building this world. Every moment I'm building a new world. A new world built with every chitta. A new world built. Again I say, I'm not talking about the world I'm not talking about this world, by the way. The world that I'm talking about is Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. That's the world I'm talking about. Remember, I think in one of the previous sermons I said, there was once a Brahmin who goes to the Buddha and asks him, where is the world? And then the Buddha says, the world rests on top of dukkha. Dukkho loko patittita. Dukkho loke patittita. The world rests on top of dukkha. So, if that is the case, and we are talking about this world that we live in, the environment, you know, the cows and the trees and the people and the sheep, you know, that's the world we are talking about, well, an arahant has still not ended dukkha, because an arahant still lives in this world. He's not talking about physical dukkha, he's talking about mental dukkha. An arahant does not have one tiny bit of mental dukkha. No more mental suffering, absolutely none, zero. And so therefore, he must have eradicated the world. So the world that we are talking about is not this world outside. It's the world that we create in our minds. Remember last week we talked about models? How when you look at a girl and you think she looks pretty. I mean, how do you say a girl looks pretty? You have to have a model of a girl in your mind, who you compare the girl that you look at with or against. You know, why do some people like black girls and some people like white girls and others like Caucasian? It's because you have a model. There's a model that you hold on to that's deep-seated in your mind, and it's against that model you compare what you're looking at right now. And these models change sometimes. Now I'll give you this example because we can only attain Nibbana by looking at our own lives, right? So what I'm going to explain to you is not me giving you, is not me trying to speak something inappropriate, and so please don't take it that way. You know, today we have access to the internet. Young people introduced to lots of things on the internet, such as porn. When you look at pornographic images, pornographic videos, what happens is the model that people have in their minds, that gets deformed. Because when a child first comes into this world, the only women that he gets to see is his mother, grandmother, sisters, and they are perfectly normal, everyday type of people. But when they go on, when they start watching porn, whether it's males or females, what happens is what they see there is completely going to deform the model of the perfect woman or the perfect man. What happens then is when that model is deformed, now when they go into society, they go looking for what they have a model of inside. So if when you're walking on the street, you see a girl and you say, wow, she's pretty. It took you a flash of a second to come to that conclusion. How did that happen? All you saw was color, right? Your eyes can only pick up color. It doesn't pick up anything else. Color, as a result of light reflected on that object, hitting your eyes, goes through your brain, leaves an imprint on your mind. Now there you have your rupa. And that, because we suffer from ignorance, Avidyā paccaya sankhara. Sankhara, we're talking about abhisankara, which is self-preservation. Think of abhisankara as self-preservation. The stuff that we do to preserve ourselves. Sankhara paccaya vijñāna. Vijñāna is the magician. Now here comes along the magician. What the magician does is it takes this imprint that it just received from the mind, or through the eyes into the mind, and then it goes into its memory banks. And it starts pulling out all the kinds of, now it wants to see a pretty girl. The mind always wants to see pretty things. Doesn't want to see ugly, bad things that it doesn't like. Why? Self-preservation. Because it wants to do, all its interest is in self-preservation, now it wants to see a pretty girl. So it goes into its memory banks and brings out all the pretty girl related stuff. How tall she is, how she wears her hair, what kind of clothes does she wear, what her size is, how she looks like, how she walks, how she sits, how she talks. All these are rupas that are sedimented inside the mind. It brings all these rupa out and then it forms a picture of it. Remember we talked about nama rupa? It's like a potter working with clay, forming these objects through using the art of pottery, right? This we talked about last week. So it brings those rupas and then it shapes them into this perfect image of a girl that it has a model of now in the mind. And it's with this model now it compares the girl that it's looking at. You see, this is why these days women have to do lots of things to fit into society. This is why girls have to change how they look. Think about Botox, surgery. Right? Young girls, when we used to live in the UK, this has become an industry now. People changing the way they look, cutting bits out of their body, putting new bits into their body, right? Changing the color of their skin, changing their hair, changing how their teeth. Every bit can now be changed under the knife. Why do people do that though? It's because now to fit into society that expects a different kind of model, you have to change yourself, otherwise how can you preserve yourself? Because young people growing up, their models were based on the stuff that they saw in porn movies and in magazines. So now people have to change the way they look to fit with those models. All that because you want Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana. So what people do when they change the way they look to please somebody else is really not to please somebody else. That's what they think they're doing. It's to please themselves. Because it's only when I look the way that somebody else likes to look at me, do I now have value in society. Because if the way I look does not suit how someone expects me to look, then I have zero value in society. I can no longer give the kind of Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana that he or she expects from me. And if he can't take the kind of Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana that he or she expects from me, then I become worthless in society. Again, go back and think about, why do we create relationships in society? It's to always get the kind of Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara, the 5 aggregates. It's to get the kind of aggregates that we want for ourselves from somebody else or from something else. So what happens when that somebody else or that something else cannot give us what we want? Then we have no use for it. It becomes worthless. So if that object needs to fit into what we expect, then it's got to change. This is why people today change the way they look. They're having to do that to fit into society. Well, if you want to continue to fit into society, I can't even imagine in the next 10 years. I think human beings will look very different to what they look today. Young girls, you won't be able to recognize them. They'll all look like Barbie dolls. Because everyone will want to go under the knife. Even young men. Any time that they're not at work, they'll be at the gym, working out. Why? To fit into the model of what society expects, and then it normalizes that. This is what the new norm is. When you have a new norm, then everyone needs to fit into that. Otherwise, 2 standard deviations out and you're out of the game. Right? You have to fit into the norm. That's if you want to continue to exist in this world. But if you want to get out of this world, then you can see what I'm trying to do. I don't go to the gym anymore, but I used to. I don't comb my hair in lots of different ways like I used to. Don't have any more hair. Because now I don't want to fit into the world. I want to remove myself from the world. There's one way that you go about by doing which you continue to change yourself to fit into the world. A completely different way if you go about, you can remove yourself from this world. But that change does not happen to have overnight. Does not have to happen overnight. So when you go back into your homes, when you go back into your life, please don't feel like you have to change the way you look and the way you talk and the way you sit and stand and eat. Please don't change any of that overnight, because that's going to completely ruin your lives. Because that is completely based on an understanding. No, it's not a pretense. You shouldn't pretend anything, because you can only keep up pretenses for so long. When you live in society, people will expect things from you. They'll expect you to ring them up every once in a while and check with them. Are you okay? Are you feeling well? Right? Don't people expect that? Yes, they do. Of course they do. They'll expect you to turn up to their birthday parties. They'll expect you to bring them presents. They'll expect you to bring them a Valentine's card or a box of chocolates. When you live in society, you have to live in society. There's a great expression for that in Sinhala. Wawulai gedara gihama ellilla hitu. When you go into the bat's home, you have to hang upside down. Because that's how you behave in a bat's home. Because that's how all bats behave. So now that we are here where we are, there's a certain way that we need to behave. However, that transformation needs to only happen in our mind. Don't make that transformation outwardly, physically. Let the transformation happen in your mind through your understanding of the Dhamma. So, again, coming back, we took a long diversion. Coming back again to Avidyā, ignorance. Like this gentleman asked before, why does the mind want to continue? It's because we're trying to find happiness. That's the basic, simple truth. That's common for all of us. We're all trying to be happy. And the mind is no different. The mind wants to be happy as well. But it's doing the wrong things to be happy. That's where the problem is. It's not wanting to be happy, that's where the fault is. It's doing the things that day by day take you to unhappiness. That's where the fault is. Think about, again, going back to the times when you were young. What did your parents say? What did your brothers say, your sisters say, your elders say, your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents? They all said, build, gather, accumulate, make more. And in doing all those things, today where are you? The more things you have, the more things that are susceptible to causing you suffering. The more susceptible you are to suffering. Because each of those things will decay and die. Each of those things someone else wants. When we discussed 7-0, we talked about all these things, how, where and how attachment is what ultimately brings us suffering. So not understanding that is ignorance. That's why dukkha samudaya ajñānam, not understanding the cause for suffering, is part of ignorance, is 1/4 of it. Then dukkha nirodha ajñānam, the eradication of suffering. Now that you see the problem, the answer becomes obvious. You now understand that it's not the mango that it's not the poison that you should be afraid of, it's the mango you need to be scared of. You understand that it's not the trap that the rat needs to be scared of, it's the cheese that the rat needs to be scared of. It's not the hook that the fish needs to be scared of, it's the bait that the fish needs to be scared of. So it's not the things that on the surface cause us suffering that we need to be scared of, we need to be afraid of. It's what's underneath. It's the things that on the surface bring us happiness. That's what we need to be scared of. Sights and sounds and smells and tastes. It's like if someone's got diabetes. You look at something that's sugary and you feel like you want to have it. But every time you take something that's full of sugar, that's going to cause you even more harm. If you've got gastritis, then you should be careful from eating certain kinds of foods. But it's only when you know you've got diabetes, are you now going to be careful with what you eat. It's when you know that you have lung cancer, are you going to be careful about what you smoke? Until then, until you realize what the problem is, you're not going to think twice. So when you understand that it's attachment to things that has been taken you through in samsara, every single time, every birth in samsara, we came this far, countless births in samsara, not because of the things that we didn't like, it's always because of the things that we liked. It's always because of the things that gave us pleasure, sensual pleasures, kama. Every time we experienced sensual pleasure, we went ahead and attached to it. Why? Because we thought that's how we can find happiness. You saw that girl, she was pretty, and then you decided, I'm going to get married to her. Why? So you can bring her home and now you can look at her every day. You can listen to her voice every day. You can smell her, you can feel her, you can taste her. To enjoy her through your 5 senses, you brought her home. You see, today I was on the way here with a gentleman that drove me here. I was having this conversation. I was asking them, you know, a man gets married to a woman that he thought, you know, she's really pretty, I want to get married to her. And now they start living together. Time passes by. You know, you will know from experience, those of you who are married, that excitement that you had when you first married doesn't last forever. You know, a few months, a few years into marriage, that same spark, it's not there anymore. Now it's just another, I mean, of course you love her, yes, okay, well, you know you love yourself now, but nevertheless, you know, you're happy to live with her, right? Or him, you know, women turn it around the other way. But over time, you now want to go and find, you know, there are some men and women who become unfaithful to their partners. Back then, when they first got into the relationship, you had no thoughts of doing that. You thought, I'm going to be the most faithful husband ever. Because she's a beautiful person, she's very good, she's got great qualities, I'm going to be a very faithful person. But a few years into this relationship, now you're not finding that it's satisfying. Then you go looking for somebody else. But while you're going looking for somebody else, a third party, some other guy walking on the street, he sees you walking down the street, you as a couple, he looks at your wife and thinks, how I wish she could be my wife. Well, this guy had exactly the same feeling 2 years back. But 2 years on from getting into that relationship, things have changed. What's happened? We all have a model in our minds. The person we get married to, we think that's the exact fit for my model. But you don't get to try it out entirely until you bring it home. It's like, you know, when you go buying clothes, you'll go into the fitting room, you'll try it on, and you think, yeah, that works fine. You bring it home, now you can leisurely try it on, and you think, hang on, that's not all that I thought it was. It's a bit tight over here, or a bit loose on the other side. Things that you didn't see when you were in the fitting room, because there was a long rush. There was a long queue to the fitting room, so you wanted to get it done quick. You were in and you were out in a couple of minutes. But now you are home, you turn around, look yourself in the mirror, adjust yourself, try it on with the other coat that you have to see if it matches, and now you're thinking, I'm not so sure about this. And then you take it back and return. Do you not have that experience? Yes, of course we do. The same thing happens. When you bring that person home, by the way, I've got nothing against marriage. I'm just using examples that you can relate to. Because what I want to show you, and what I want to help you understand is that what we do is we create these models in our minds. And in creating these models in our minds, we now want the world to fit into our model. When the world doesn't fit into our model, then we become disappointed, we become frustrated. But because of our ignorance, we don't realize that the problem is with my model. What we think is the problem is outside. So what you do then? You go looking for another thing that fits your model. You go looking for another person, another thing.
Could be the model is changing.
Yes, the model can be changing as well. The model is also changing, and the person outside is also changing. Constantly changing. You know, this is why I said, as a young child, the only people you associated was your mother, your sister, your grandmother. And when you thought of a woman, you thought, you know, it was a normal person, a normal figure. But then, exposed to the world, exposed to the internet, exposed to the television, exposed to adult magazines, now the model has changed. This is what happens. Models change, and the people change as well. But what doesn't happen is that person fitting exactly with the model. Because that's constantly in flux. This is constantly in flux. Every time you try to, it's like, you know, in your left hand you have a shape. It's a circle at this point in time. On the right hand you have something into which you can fit this shape into. Right? So say you have a ball in your left hand. In your right hand you have something that's complementary. So this ball can fit into it. But as you try to fit this in, this changes shape. Now it's a triangle. And you try to fit, it doesn't fit. The next time again you pull them apart and now you try to fit it again. This time now this is a square. and you try to fit it. Now it doesn't work either. So every time you try to fit these things, two things together, either the object changes or the model changes. Happiness can only be found when these two things fit exactly. And now you're wondering, why am I still not happy? That's because these things are constantly changing, in flux. But one could say, well, isn't that the nature of impermanence? Anitya. Isn't that the nature of impermanence? Things are always changing. The nature of an arahant is he doesn't set expectations on these two things to fit. So the problem is that not that these two things don't fit. The real problem is having the expectation that these two things must fit. Or in other words, this model is the expectation. Get rid of the model. Now really doesn't matter what that shape is after all. If you don't have the model of a perfect woman, you can live with any woman that you come across. If you don't have a perfect model of a child, then any child is a perfect child for you. If you don't have a model of a perfect job, then you can be happy with any job. If you don't have a perfect color, the model of your favorite color, then you're happy with any color. It's that model that always causes us suffering. So it's that model that we need to eradicate. To understand that, we need to understand the nature of anicca, which is what I have been trying to explain to you for so long. Anicca is that things in this world don't happen to my liking. You have cause and effect. When there are causes, then it gives you the result. Again, the reason you're all alive right now is not because you want to be alive. Is it? It's because there are causes that keep you alive. I think I've explained to you in the past, there are I think now in Holland and in some other countries, they have this practice of euthanasia or assisted suicide. So assisted suicide is where you go through this procedure. You have to get permission first from the authorities, and then they permit you to die essentially. So they inject into you this serum, which in a few moments kill you basically. Now if being alive is to my liking, I shouldn't really have to go through all that procedures. I should just think, I want to be dead, 3, 2, 1, go. And be dead. Well, one could say, well, what about if I go and hang myself? No, if you hang yourself, that's not because you want to be dead, you are dead. It's because you've now taken away one of the causes that keep you alive through the process of asphyxiation, which is strangling yourself, cutting out air into your lungs. That's one of the things that are required to keep you alive. Let's take the simple example of a fire. What are the causes that keep a fire alive? You need to have something that's flammable. So you have wood or something like that. You need heat and you need oxygen. For as long as those three conditions are there, you're going to have a fire. What happens if you bring a cat and place it next to the fire? Is that going to make any change to the fire? What? No, not on the fire. No, I wouldn't condone that. No, not on the fire. You bring an animal, whatever animal, and then keep it next to the fire. Is that going to make any change to the fire? No. Why is that? Because a cat is not one of the causes that gives rise to the fire. Again, in science, you'll have done this experiment if you worked out in your labs. When you want to try out a certain experiment, you keep changing certain factors to see what the result is. If by changing one factor it makes no impact on the result, then you can come to the conclusion that this is not a factor for that result. Well, the same goes for Dhamma as well, for anicca. In the example of the fire, if you take away heat by throwing water onto it, then you've taken away heat. Now whether you like it or not, that's going to take out the fire. Or if you take away the wood, now there's no flammable object. So whether you like it or not, you've taken away one of the requirements for that fire to be burning. If you take away oxygen, now you've taken away one of the prerequisites, one of the requirements. And then you can no longer, whether you like it or not, keep the fire burning. What happens if you take away the oxygen and the fire is still burning? What conclusion can you come to then? A fire does not need oxygen to burn. Then fire is not one of the causes that gives rise to this result. So the reason we are all alive and kicking right now is because there are all these causes that keep us alive. You know, there are lungs working, taking oxygen to our blood through the blood vessels. There's our heart beating. There's a brain that's circulating there's a brain that's keeping on control and in check of all the hormones that needs to keep the body going. And there's all the other vital organs that are doing its functions. So take away any one of them and see how long you're going to be alive. No, don't. I'm not being serious, by the way. But what we need to understand is that life is nothing but the result of a number of causes. Everything that is a sankata, everything that is conditioned, the same rule goes. The same theory applies. So what we need to understand then is, things don't happen the way they do because we want it to happen the way they do. It's nothing to do with my liking. My liking, my expectation has nothing to do with it. Again, I'll give you another example because I want you to clearly understand this. You know, one could say, well, hang on a second. I wanted to become a doctor, and today I'm a doctor. That's because I wanted to become one. Really? You're not a doctor because you wanted to become a doctor. You're a doctor because you did all the right things to become a doctor. Whether you liked it or not, if you did the things that are required to become a doctor, whether you like it or not, that's the important bit. You will be a doctor. If you sit all the right exams, if you do all the right reading, if you do all the studying that you need to do, you do your homework, you do this, that, if you do all the things that are required, then you're going to get the result. Whether you like it or not has got nothing to do with it. If you like to do it, what's going to happen is you're going to be more inclined to put in the causes that give you that result. That's the only difference. Because if you like to become a doctor, if you want to become a doctor, what you're going to do is you're going to make extra effort to bring the causes to give you the result. When two parents want to make a child and they create a child, if they have created a child because they want a child, well, how many parents are there out there who try to have a child but they can't? Some parents, they try for months and years and they still can't have a child. Why is that? Because they don't have the right conditions to give them a child. Then there are other couples who unite, they never expected a child, and before you know it, they're pregnant. Well, if it's my liking that has to give me the result, then surely they shouldn't have become pregnant, right? But liking has nothing to do with it. What you want, what your expectation is, has nothing to do with it. For as long as the causes are there, you're going to get the result. So that is the nature of anicca. Now, because of that nature of anicca, what happens is, if you are ignorant of that, if you don't understand that, if you don't realize that that is the nature of all conditioned things in this world, people are going to set expectations. Because what we think is, it's expectation that's, my expectations will be met. That is the ignorance that we are under. My expectations will be met. You go and flick a switch to turn on the light. You flick the switch, light doesn't come on. What happens? Frustration. Usually you even make a noise, you make a sound, right? You go, you try it again. Why is this light not working? That frustrates you. You ask your son to do something before you get home. Get his homework done. You come home and you find that he hasn't done his homework yet. What's happened there? Again, the right conditions weren't there for him to have done his homework. For whatever reason, it might have been because he was busy with something else, or perhaps he didn't hear you when you asked him, when you gave the instruction, or perhaps he didn't have the things that he required to do his homework. So, all those reasons have to line up to get the result. But you come home, you ask the son, hey, did you do your homework? No, I didn't. That makes you angry. Why? Because you think, if I expect something, that has to happen. The reason we expect things from this world is because we don't understand the anicca nature of this world. We don't understand that things only happen when the right conditions are there for that to happen. Hetum paticca sambhutam. Hetu bhanga nirujjati. Sangbhuta, coming together to give rise. Sangbhuta. Hetum paticca. Hetu, causes. Paticca. To come together, to unite in the way that I expect it to. In the way that is right. In the way that it has to happen. See, when we set those expectations, that is what causes us suffering. Not being able to understand that it's hetum paticca sambhutam, hetu bhanga nirujjati. So, if then what we are aiming to do with our lives is to try to find happiness, to eradicate suffering, to find this noble truth of the cause of suffering, which we've talked about, and then we come to the noble truth of eradicating suffering, then it's expectation that we need to eradicate. It's attachment that we need to eradicate. It's those models that we need to eradicate. It's this feeling that what I like is what's going to happen. It's that ignorance that we need to eradicate. And then ultimately, well, what's the path to eradicate that? The Noble Eightfold Path. Why so? Not because I say so. Because it starts with Samma Ditti. Last week we discussed Samma Ditti in some length. Samma Ditti, as we explained last week. Sang is this coming together of ignorance and attachment. Ma is to eradicate, to remove, and Ditti is your view. So for all this time we've been living with the understanding, with the false view that attachment brings me happiness. Models, creating those models bring me happiness. Setting expectations on this world brings me happiness. But now we begin to realize slowly that every time I have this model, I try to fit something into this model. And when things don't fit, then that causes me grief. I set expectations on this world. When I go and flick that switch, I have an expectation. As soon as I flick the switch, the light must come on. I flick the switch, no light. Now I am disappointed. But that would never frustrate an Arahatun Mahansa. Why? Because he has no expectation of that to happen. I mean, yes, he understands that it's by flicking the switch the light's going to come on. But when he flicks the switch, if the light doesn't come on, he knows 100% that the right conditions are not there to give me the result. That's all. Why should I go and suffer for that? Why should I why should I suffer because of that? Now you don't have the light and you're suffering as well. It's like 2 in 1. It was bad enough not having the light come on. Why suffer for it as well? That's a double. So the path to eradicate that is first come into that view, right view. Once you've come to the right view, then Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, which is right thoughts. Samma Sankappa means to begin to analyze this world in the right way. But to analyze, you have to have grasped the concept first. You have to have grasped the theory behind it first. The theory that it's attachment that brings me unhappiness. It's attachment that brings me suffering, not attachment brings me happiness. That's wrong view. Attachment brings me suffering is the right view. So bring all those 4 together, then you have Vidya. Avidyā was what? Dukkhe ajñānam, dukkha samudaya ajñānam, dukkha nirodha ajñānam, dukkha nirodha gamini, patipadaya ajñānam. So what is Vidya? Dukkhe jnanam, dukkha samudaya jnanam, dukkha nirodha jnanam, dukkha nirodha gamini, patipadaya jnanam. Is to know about that, to understand that, to comprehend that. So when you have comprehended that, when you understand it, now you have the path on which you can travel to eradicate suffering entirely. So that is a problem that we need to that is a problem that we should be working on henceforth. So, going back to Paticcasamuppada, just briefly, last week what we talked about was dukkha and dukkha samudaya. How avidyā paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijñāna, and we ended up with jati paccaya jara marana. Now if you look at the reverse of it, we are looking for the cause that gave the result of dukkha. And the path to eradicate that is bhava nirodha jati nirodho. If you eradicate bhava, you have eradicated jati. To eradicate bhava, what you should do is eradicate upadana. If you eradicate upadana, you have eradicated bhava. And then you go all the way back. Eradicate avidyā, you have eradicated sankhara. So eradicate avidyā, no more jati, no more bhava, no more jara marana shoka parideva dukkha domanasa. So you see, the root of all this is ignorance. That is the foundation. Remove ignorance, problem solved. Thankfully. Otherwise we'll have to work on each of those 12 elements of the Paticcasamuppada process, which would be a job and a half. But all we have to do is work on ignorance. Ignorance is nothing but not seeing the reality of this world. This is why you need to associate with noble people, Aryas, who constantly show us right from wrong. Whenever we go and attach ourselves to something, the world will come and say, yeah, get more of it, buy more, attach more, have more. Whereas an Arya would say, the more you have, the more you're going to suffer. So when you understand that, letting go becomes so easy. So I repeat again, just to emphasize, what you should do when you get back home today is not let go of everything. Don't let go, just let go. Let it happen. Let the process of letting go happen. It will happen when it's right. When the time's right, the right fruit will fall from the tree. You don't have to go plucking the fruit. When the fruit is ripe, it will fall from the tree. Then just go pick it up. Likewise, don't go letting go of things, because that's going to be painful. It's going to cause harm to both yourself and others who live with you. You know, sometimes people come and listen to these sermons, they go to their homes and say, sometimes they come to me and say, my wife and I, we are practicing the Dhamma, we are going on this path, I no longer want to be with her, right? I no longer want to sleep with her on the same bed. Please can you explain to her, because she wants me to sleep with her. And I say, it's not her I need to have a chat with, it's you I need to have a chat with. You've got it all wrong. Why do you have to demonstrate how you are practicing the path to somebody else? It's an entirely private thing. Your understanding of Dhamma is not to change the way you live your life. As in, it's not how you lift your arm or put your legs forward. That's not what the Dhamma is for. It's to put out the fire that burns within your heart. That's what the Dhamma is for. So do whatever you do at home. That's perfectly fine. Be with your kids. Take them out for a meal. Give your girlfriend or your wife a card and take her out shopping. Do all those things that you have to do. But when you feel raga, dvesha, moha, that's when you need to use the Dhamma. When you feel the fire ignite within your hearts, that's when you need to put the fire out. And that's what the Dhamma is for. So when you practice the path, don't let that have an adverse effect on the other people that live with you. Because if that's what's happening, you're walking down the wrong path. Sorry to say. So if you're walking the right path, no one at home should have to suffer because of what you're doing. Because you're walking the path to happiness. How is it that other people start suffering as a result? That's not logical. That's not right. If someone comes and shouts at you, and that makes you angry, now that's where you need to apply this medicine. If you see a girl walking on the street and your heart starts beating faster, because now you have raga, that's where you need to apply this medicine. But where you have duties and responsibilities to your family, you must always fulfill them. You can't apply anicca dukkha anatta there. That's not right. When the time's right for you, and if you are prepared and you have the merit to become a monk, if that is the path that you might choose in future, then make sure that the environment around you is prepared to accept that. Because otherwise you'll have problems. You don't need problems, you're trying to put out problems one by one. Okay. So, as I always say, this is just a theory lesson, right? Your practical is at home. Your practical is while you are driving to work. Your practical is while you are at school, while you are with your friends. Anicca Dukkha Anatta and the Buddha's Dhamma is nothing but a medicine to put out the fires of Raga, Dvesha, Moha. Nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. So please don't abuse it. Because if you start abusing it, people are going to fault the Dhamma. They're going to start pointing the finger at the Buddha and say, hey, you, and they're going to start pointing fingers at us and say, my husband, he started going to listen to sermons and now he's coming home and he doesn't want even to be with me. And then if you go and behave like that at home, you're no longer going to be able to come and listen to sermons. The same applies for the women. The same applies for mothers and parents, right? So fulfill your responsibilities. Only use the Dhamma as an ointment. It's a cream, it's a medicine, it's a pill to cure the disease of Raga, Dvesha, Moha and nothing else. Please remember that. Any questions before we conclude? Who is our? Our mind is cheated by Avidyā, ignorance. This ignorance comes from associating with ignoble people, asatpurusha. The more we associate with asatpurushas, which are immoral, ignoble people, the more they defile our minds with ignorance. So unfortunately, the thing is this, you live a lay life, and in the lay world, people will want you to make, build, have, accumulate. Can't help. That's the life that we chose. So when you're among asatpurusha, when you're among immoral people, try your best to make use of this Dhamma to redeem yourself. Because otherwise you're going to go exactly where they're going. You're going to end in the hells along with them as well. So if you want to choose a different path in life, then be a satpurusha to yourself. When the fires of Raga, Dvesha, Moha ignite in you, why can't you be a satpurusha to yourself? Why can't you give yourself moral, noble association? Don't point your finger at somebody else. Like I said at the beginning, always the fault is with you. Is that your question that you put forward before? Okay. So what is the difference between a Samma Sambuddha and an Arahata Buddha? A Samma Sambuddha is someone who understands this truth, the Four Noble Truths that we just talked about, by himself, with no teacher. He doesn't have a teacher. He realizes the Four Noble Truths by himself. And the same is true for a Pacceka Buddha, sometimes called a silent Buddha, because a Pacceka Buddha cannot teach the Dhamma to somebody else. That's not because his mouth gets locked up when he becomes a Buddha. It's because the way he realized the Dhamma was not by following the Noble Eightfold Path. He discovered the Dhamma by accident. It's like, he sees a man fall from a tree and he becomes a Pacceka Buddha. Now you go and ask him, how can I become a Buddha? What's he going to say? Get a man to climb up a tree and cut the branch while he's on top of it. You'll see him fall, and then that's going to help you become a Pacceka Buddha. That doesn't work. This is why you need to listen to the Dhamma either from a Samma Sambuddha or from someone who has listened to the teaching of a Samma Sambuddha and at least become a Sotapanna. You can only absorb and understand the Dhamma if you listen to the preaching delivered by at least someone who's a Sotapanna. That's the only time when you can become a Sotapanna yourself. You can listen to Dhamma sermons delivered by other people and understand the Dhamma but not comprehend the Dhamma. You will learn it, you will understand it, but you won't be able to comprehend it. By comprehension I mean you being able to apply it by yourself, where you no longer need a teacher after that point. Dana ganima saha avbodhaya. That's the difference between the two. Understanding one comprehending is something else. To do that, you have to at least listen to the sermon delivered by a Sotapanna. So the question I have here, okay, so this is a request from our organizers. So I think they're pointing out that there are a lot of new listeners today who joined us, and that's great, and we always welcome you with open arms and warm hearts. Please come and join us and continue to do so. But what I would encourage is, please go and listen to our previous sermons, because otherwise I'm going to have to start from square one every time, and then that's going to, it's going to lose interest for some of our more regular listeners, as well as people who listen to sermons online. Last week we talked about dependent origination, which was an introduction. Today I've picked up one of the factors, Avidyā. Next week perhaps we'll talk about Sankara. And next week, the following week, we might talk about Vijnana, right? Because we need to make progress gradually. There's no rush, by the way. We'll make progress gradually. But if you don't come prepared, then you're going to lose interest very quickly. And that would be a shame. So, and I know that, there'll be some listeners among you, because you've been coming along to these sermons regularly, perhaps, some of you are already Aryas, at least on the path to becoming a Sotapanna, if not having become a Sotapanna already. Who knows? We can't tell. Because if you listen to a sermon that includes the Chaturarya Satya, that's what you need to become a Sotapanna. So how do I know, people here are not Sotapannas by now? You could be. So when you have that basic foundation, then you obviously want to progress on that path. You want to understand something else the following week. So we need to try and make some progress. Like I said, there's no rush for this, but it would help if new listeners could listen to these sermons. So if you bring your friends, please encourage them to listen to previous sermons before they come along. At least a handful. There'll be basic things like how to find happiness in your life. What is happiness? What are the 5 aggregates? Because otherwise what I'm going to have to do is give the basics from every single time. And then in the time that we have, we're not going to be able to make progress or complete these sermons. I hope that's not an unreasonable request. We also have CDs. I don't know if we brought along any today. Have we? Okay. So if it's easier for you to listen to a CD while you're traveling, then please ask for one. They're all free. There's no charge for that. Why is that? Because the Buddha didn't charge me anything for his Dhamma. If he had put a price on it, we'd all be bankrupt. So the Buddha's Dhamma is priceless, and therefore the gift of Dhamma has always got to be priceless. We'll never charge anything for the gift of Dhamma. So ask for them and listen to previous sermons, and then continue to come along. And I'm sure you'll be able to take something with you when you come. I think in previous sermons we also talked a lot about how to save your kids from society, from the things that are happening out there in the world today. How due to sex and drugs, this world is getting destroyed by the day. I've given you examples in the previous sermons about how young monks in our monastery, when they in their lay lives, how they were on the brink of being destroyed as young kids. But thanks to the Dhamma, they were saved. Every time I tell these stories, it's because I want you to save your children, to save your families. Because otherwise, if your children aren't alive and they aren't sane, what good is the Dhamma then? So please listen to previous sermons. And the other request was, I think there were a few people interested in transcribing the sermons, which is typing them out for the benefit of people who prefer to read and understand rather than listen and understand. And I know, when I used to live in the UK, a lot of people there read. They read a lot, more than listen. So I think it would be good if we can make certain, booklets, at least PDF files or something like that, and make these things publicly available. Because whatever it is, it could just be just one link to someone that someone reads about anicca, and then it opens up an entire new world to them, and then they become curious, and now they want to come and listen to these sermons. All we need is a hook, just like the hook that you have the bait which takes you to the karma worlds. Again, this is also a hook to bring you into Nibbana. All of you are here because someone asked you to come along, right? Someone was a Kalyana Mitra to you, a noble friend. Thanks to them you have this opportunity today. So why don't you give the gift of being a Kalyana Mitra to somebody else? You can give that by inviting someone to come along to these sermons, or you can do that by transcribing these sermons and getting, passing it on. Someone can read it and come along. But if you're doing that, the request was, please let the gentleman at the back know that you're prepared to do that, because they're organizing it and they want to coordinate it so that you're not going to duplicate effort. Okay? Yes? No. Yeah. Thank you. So in a deep state of sleep, or in a deep state of unconsciousness, the mind is still there, but the mind is in a very weak state. So at that, when the mind is in that state, it can't easily be excited. By excited I mean, you give it Rupa Shabda Gandha Rasa Sparsha, it's not going to do much with it. So this is why, if you ever had a chance to read the book of discipline, Vinaya Pitaka, which the Buddha put forward for the conduct of monks and nuns, there's plenty of other stuff you can read before you read that. But if you have trouble sleeping at night, then go ahead. The Buddha never laid out, or he never admonished monks, or he never faulted monks for things that they would do in their sleep. So if something happens while you're sleeping, whether it's, say even if you hit somebody in your sleep, that's not a papakam. It's not unmeritorious, because your consciousness is very weak at that point in time. While you're in that deep state of sorry, you said when? In deep state of sleep, right? Yeah. In a deep state of sleep, your mind is not, it's not awake, it's not, that full sense of consciousness is not there. So it doesn't have these things called javana. Now we are going into Abhidhamma. I don't want to go there. Javana is where volition happens. It's where you pick and choose what you want to do. So then you make decisions. It's when you're able to make decisions, when you're able to pick and choose what you want to do, when you have intention. Chetanaham bhikkhave kammam vadami, right? Kamma is always a result of chetana. But when you don't have javana in those thought cycles, because when you're in deep sleep, those thought cycles don't have javana. Javana is, can't remember the English term for it. Javana is a chaita, sorry, it's a thought moment, a chaitasika, and there are 7 of them in every chitta. But when you don't have those javanas in a chitta, then no kamma is performed from those chittas. So because no kamma is performed, either good or bad that you do while you're asleep counts for nothing. Okay. I think that was the old question. Yes. Right, I think we'll conclude the sermon there then. So before we conclude, let us all take a moment to transfer the merits that we have all acquired to all the devas, brahmas, spirits, demons and the dead that we invited before the start of this sermon, as well as all our ancestors, anyone who is not among us today, if they were in any state, shape or form able to listen to the Dhamma, to understand the Dhamma, and they joined us and they rejoiced in this meritorious deed. May they all be able to rejoice in the merits that we have all acquired. And if any of them are born in the woeful plane, may they be able to redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. And through the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, may they all be able to attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. As well as that, please take a moment to reflect on, please take a moment to transfer the merits that we have all acquired today to everyone who made this event a success, including the chief incumbent monk, Most Venerable Uduya Dhamma Loka Nayak Swamin Wahanse, as well as all the other monks who are resident in this monastery and this temple, and all the ladies and gentlemen who took the effort, who took the trouble to organize this sermon, either by inviting you or making the facilities available here. May they all rejoice in the merits that we have all acquired, and may they all be able to attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana in this very birth itself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And then finally, please take a moment to transfer the merits that we have all acquired to anyone and everyone who made it possible for you to come and join us today, whether that is by transporting you here, by offering you a meal, and perhaps by doing that put you out of hunger, or perhaps by offering you a glass of water, by which they helped put you into a good state of mind, be able to listen to the sermon, or perhaps by offering you a seat, or maybe by showing you the path, or perhaps by even by simple things like perhaps ironing your clothes and giving them to you and asking you and inviting you to go and listen to the sermon. Anything and everything that anyone might have done to help you to be present here today, may they all rejoice in these merits. May all of them be able to attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana in this very birth itself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And finally, may all the merits that we have all acquired today help us all progress on this path, help us all develop and cultivate the Dhamma that the Lord Buddha taught us, and in doing so, may all of us be able to attain the supreme attainments of Sotapanna, Sakurdagami, Anagami, and finally the supreme bliss of Nibbana by attaining the fruit of Arahat. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May all beings attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.